Well, hello there everybody, Dodgy Gamer here. Welcome back to the channel and welcome back for a review episode of Newgen Nation, where we just wrap up, reflect on the results and talk a little bit about what's happening for Newgen Nation in FM20. So thank you very much for joining me once again, viewers, as we wrap up Newgen Nation, my first ever experiment on the channel. You might see over in the top corner there, we've advanced to July 2050. So we've skipped ahead about 12 years from where we ended the last episode. I just want to take today a very generic look at UAE and Qatar. We won't be going through players so much one by one. We'll just be looking at the squads as they are, how they fared in recent international competitions, and I'll be talking a little bit about what we learned from this experiment and also the changes I'm planning to make Newgen Nation even better when we revisit it for Football Manager 2020, which we will be doing as soon as the editor's available. So we start off at Qatar. When this series began, Qatar were the higher ranked of the two nations, Qatar and UAE, and they got the youth facilities and the youth products coming through from Barcelona, from Manchester United, and from PSG. So three pretty big clubs to be having players from. As we can see at the moment, their world ranking is 55th. We see they have been higher, up around 39th, but over the last few years, from over the last decade or so, it's been a bit up and down, it would seem. Let's have a look at their squad, first of all, and once we've clicked on the right button, you see some of these are still from my old shortlist, so some of them still around from last time, just going purely by value, not the best indicator, I know, but we see we've got a couple of players here past the 5 million mark. So we've got a left winger who's playing in Qatar, in the Qatari League. We've also got here a defensive midfielder, also playing at the same club, Aldu Heil. Then we've got one player here worth £11 million playing at Metz, a defender. And then we've got a bit of a mix. We've got a few youngsters, obviously new intake. We see a couple of players there from Barcelona B who've made it into the team. There's one player who's gone out to Ulsan. We do have a player listed here at Barcelona, youngster, 2 million, so probably not the first team player, but someone who they've kept in their squad. And then we've just got this mix. We've got FC Dallas, we've got Bristol City, we've got Exeter represented. You know, there are two players at FC Dallas, but nobody who really stands out as a huge superstar player. So this is our player at Metz. We see he's on 71 caps at the tender age of 25. We see he came through at PSG, so obviously came through the French system, got a handful of games for PSG, but it took a move to Metz, who've been yo-yoing between League 1 and League 2, it would seem. And when we left Qatar last time, they'd just been eliminated by South Korea in the second round of the World Cup, so there was progress there that they made it through to the knockout rounds for the first time. After that, we see they went to the West Asian Championship, made it to the final, but got absolutely hammered by Saudi Arabia there. On to the following year's Asian Cup, they made it to the quarterfinals. It's Iran again who knocked them out, but before that they had a good run. Then they went back into World Cup qualifying, breezed through the first set of qualifiers, first round for them, but second round overall. Then we see pretty ropey beginning to the final stage of qualifiers until they got a big win over Indonesia. Again, West Asian Championship, and again they came unstuck against Saudi Arabia. It seems like the gravy train of these young players kind of ground to a halt around this time. And then we see mixed fortunes in the World Cup qualifiers, but we know how these Asian World Cup qualifiers work with this new Super 48 team or 48 nation World Cup coming our way. It's very easy for them to qualify, it would seem. Yeah, they did qualify indeed. They went to the World Cup, draw with Costa Rica, which they probably got to be disappointed with, at the World Cup in Germany in 2042, and then a defeat to Belgium saw them go home. They did bounce back though by winning the West Asian Football Federation Championship, beating Syria in the final in 2042, then quarterfinalists again, and again it was Iran as they got knocked out in the Asian Cup, and then back into the whole cycle of World Cup qualifying. Another West Asian Championship, another win, another victory over Syria in the final. They seem to have that West Asian Championship nailed down. Then another World Cup qualification, we got to 2046, but another first round exit and disappointment, a defeat to Serbia and a defeat to the United States. Then, they went head-to-head with the UAE in the West Asian Championship. They got the 2-1 win there, so that's 3 in a row, I believe. Then another Asian Cup quarterfinal, this time though not Iran, it was Australia who knocked them out. Back round to World Cup qualifying, we see lots of wins racked up there, and then they end up in the final stage of qualifiers. Brief break for a 4th consecutive West Asian Championship final and another win over UAE. Qualified for the World Cup, seems a bit more easily this time, and then they finally make it there. A draw with Nigeria, narrow defeat to Ukraine, they went home again. So it seems they didn't really ever come to the level of being a force. I mean, they became World Cup regulars, but regular whipping boys at the World Cup, it would seem, unfortunately, for Qatar. What then of the United Arab Emirates? Well, we see a much higher world ranking here, 34th, and we see kind of progression. Few ups and downs, of course, few fluctuations over the last decade or so, but an overall upward trend. They have been as high as 27th, we see. If we have a look at their squad first then. Okay, stop right there. Look at this guy, Said Mohamed Omar, a Marseille player, 19 years old and valued at £52 million. A wonder kid, 31 caps so far, 3 goals, and he looks pretty tasty. Interesting, isn't it? Second wonder kid we've had come out of Marseille in this experiment, because there was Johar, if I got his name right, who went to Liverpool in the previous episodes we looked at, and we see he came through, bit of time in the Marseille reserves, had a few games for them, had a season on loan at Dijon, had a full season back in the first team at Marseille. Oh, look at that, 11 goals, 7.11 average weighting, 7-11. He's just getting the goals in all the time. That is possibly the best player to come out of this experiment so far. So they've got a world superstar, potential world superstar, I should say. They've also got a player there who plays at Boreham Wood and is worth £5.75 million. What's going on there? Boreham Wood are in the Sky Bet Championship, got themselves all the way up. Championship regulars, by the looks of it. No one really with an eye-catching value, so they seem to be a bit of a one-team player. And again, we've got players who've gone back home to the UAE. We've got players who've gone to the MLS. We've got Seattle represented this time. We've got someone at Real Madrid, but as he's only valued at 2.2 million, I'm guessing he's either running down his contract or he's just not very good. They're just going back through the last 12 years with the United Arab Emirates. We see West Asian Championship failed to get out of the group stage. Asian Cup quarterfinals, unlucky there, knocked out by the Saudis on penalties. Very easy progress through World Cup qualifying. Doing well in the final stage there as well, it has to be said. West Asian Championship, they actually won it back in 2040, beating Saudi Arabia on penalties, so a measure of revenge for them there. And then some big wins as they qualified for the 2042 World Cup, where unfortunately they would lose. They must be kicking themselves at losing to Tunisia. I'm sure that's a team that they would have been banking on beating to progress. And then an inevitable defeat to Italy, another group stage exit in the West Asian Championship. Wow, the Asian Cup. They got through an extra time win over the Saudis in the quarterfinals, a solid win over South Korea, but they came unstuck, much like Qatar we saw previously in this series, came unstuck against Iran in the Asian Cup final with a 1-0 defeat, but they made it all the way to the final. Great progress from them. Back into the World Cup qualifiers, doing very well there, but another group stage exit at the West Asian Championship. We'll talk about that in a moment. Then they completed their World Cup qualifying, 2046 World Cup. They made the second round. Pretty tough group. They beat Senegal, got a point off the Netherlands. That was enough to send them through, but it was Italy again. Italy knocked them out. It looks like, look at that, took the lead after 3 minutes, but were not able to hold on. Then, as we've already seen, they reached the West Asian Championship final later that year. And then they had another good run in the Asian Cup. A big win over South Korea again, knocked out by China in the semi-finals and then defeated in the third place playoff. But another good run from them. back into the cycle of World Cup qualifying. We see looks like they struggle a bit here in the final stage, but again, as we've already commented, quite easy for them to get through. Another defeat to Qatar in the West Asian Championship final. I think they then got through to the 2050 World Cup. Indeed they did, and again they got out of their group. Poor result against England in the opening game, but then they were able to get a win over Paraguay. Pretty big scalp there. And it's Italy again. Italy knocked them out, but it took extra time to do it as they went to the 2050 World Cup in Brazil. Okay, I mentioned earlier that I would talk a little bit more about the West Asian Championship. One thing I neglected to do, which was a bit of an oversight on my part, I must admit. If you look here, the West Asian Championship detail level are set to the later stages. So that means, as it says here, it's popping up with a nice box for us, that the later stages, so the semi-final and the final, get played out in full detail. I think this perhaps explains why United Arab Emirates were always getting knocked out in the group stage, or generally getting knocked out in the group stage. That it's taken the kind of reputation, the standings at the start of the game, it's just simming through those games, instant result, not really picking a proper team or playing out the game properly within the context of the Football Manager software. So maybe that's why UAE were losing out. So that's something, when I run this experiment again in the future, that's one of the changes I'm going to make. I'm going to look at the competitions that the nations are going to be in and put them onto full detail. And one really interesting thing for me with this experiment was with a couple of the teams just not really producing any quality regens. We didn't see anybody of note come through at Barcelona. So if you think about it, what have we've simmed this for 32 seasons, and Barcelona don't produce a homegrown talent. That kind of goes against a lot of what we know in the football world. I mean, maybe it's because, those Qatari players, when they come through, their natural ability is just not the same as Spanish players. I know there are things in the database, there's stats for how important the game is in a country, maybe what kind of junior coaching they would have had out in Qatar before joining the Barcelona Academy. So there are those kind of variables to factor in. But, Real Madrid, PSG, maybe Man City, they're not so well known for their homegrown talents. They're more buying clubs, as it were. So perhaps we wouldn't expect them to produce players and bring them into the first team so often. What has been a bit of a surprise is Marseille. I wasn't two minds about including them. It kind of fitted the narrative that we've got Barcelona and Real Madrid, both through sponsors with their Qatari and Emirati connections. We've got PSG with their Qatari connection. And we've got Man City. So let's just put in PSG and Man City's rivals as well. So we've got three sets of rivals. So that's how Marseille ended up. So they're probably the weakest of the six teams in the game, yet they are the ones who have produced the quality players. They've produced two players that have gone on to big things. We had our previous player on the last couple of videos. You can go back and watch those, who came through and transferred to Liverpool, eventually ended up at Preston, that one. And then we've got this Said Mohamed Omar, another wonder kid that's come through. So interesting that Marseille produced the better players. So what have we learned from this experiment? Well, I think we've certainly improved the fortunes of those teams. UAE in particular, in the long term, seem to have benefited the most from having this extra pool of talent available to them. Qatar did initially. They had a good spell running up to the middle of the experiment, but have tailed off in recent years. Of course, one thing I didn't do, now I'm thinking, we call these experiments when we do them on YouTube. You could argue, is it really an experiment or not? And one of the cases you could make for this not really being an experiment, I think about when I've done experimental research and so on in my job and in my studies, the one thing that you'll be told to do is to have a control group. So one comment you could make about this is, well, what's to say that Qatar and UAE wouldn't have produced some decent players and got to the World Cup knockout rounds and reached the Asian Cup final anyway, just running the game without any changes, which is a fair point. So that is another change that we're going to bring in, I think, for a future iteration of Newgen Nation, as well as running those regional championships that the nation competes in on full detail. We're also going to make sure that we run a control save. We're going to have a save with absolutely no changes, vanilla database, sim it through and make the comparison at the end. Not every episode, but at the end of the experiment, we're going to make the comparison. The other thing I'm going to do, I did say nation there, and that was quite deliberate. I'm going to cut this down to just focusing on one nation. I want to improve the fortunes of one nation. So what I'm thinking is one tiny nation, and we're going to transport over perhaps more clubs. We're going to look at maybe 8 or 10 clubs that we transport over in the same way. We move their stadium, their youth facilities, their training facilities, their location to that nation to be determined. And then we see what that flood of players coming in does for that nation moving forward. It'd just be easier to keep track of one nation. And what I'm also planning to do for FM20 is, instead of going in 4-year cycles, expanding that a bit, maybe going in 8-year cycles or 10-year cycles, and running the experiment for a good long time, for about 50 years. So there'll be 5 episodes coming out of that at least. I think that's going to give us a lot more insight into, you know, the kind of quality regens and how being at these top clubs with top youth facilities helps them develop. So let me know what you think about that in the comments, please. Do you think that sounds like a good way to run the experiment? I'm also looking at having a parallel feature running alongside the video episodes, where I perhaps through a website, I'll get into the nuts and bolts of it a bit more, and that's where I will share the profiles and the screenshots of some of the promising players and track them through more, whereas in the videos just going to focus more generally how that national team's doing and how the players are developing. So let me know what you think about all of that. Your comments and feedback are always very much appreciated, and I hope you've enjoyed my first experiment and that you'll be back for my next experiment in Football Manager 2020 sometime in November or December, I guess. But anyway, for now, I'm Dodgy Gamer. Thank you very much for watching. Please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I'll see you again soon.